and students from Palawan State University of Puerto Princesa, Palawan, headed by Professor Zorel Shores and Miss Mary Jane Talantad. We'd like to welcome them to the Senate, Mr. President.
Welcome to all of our guests.
Mr. President, I move that we take up the reference of business at a later hour, Mr. President.
Is there any objection to the motion of the Majority Leader? Hearing none, approved.
Thank you, Mr. President, for approving the motion, and the reason I have moved for that is so that we can give way to the third reading bills. We have a number of bills on third reading, and we would like to avail of the presence of the members of the Senate. So I move for the consideration for third reading of Senate Bill 1279 under Committee Report 21.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
May we request the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Secretary.
An act establishing a comprehensive national feeding program to combat hunger and undernutrition among Filipino children and for other purposes.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed last January 30, thereby complying with the three-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading Senate Bill 1279 through a roll call vote.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. And the Secretary will conduct the roll call vote.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Cordon, Onasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soveri, Senate President Pimentel.
With 18 affirmative votes, 0 negative votes, Senate Bill number 1279 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, Senator Gatchalian wishes to explain his vote.
Okay, Senator Gatchalian is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would just like to commend this body for prioritizing the approval of this impactful and timely bill. If passed into law, the National School Feeding Program created by the Pagkain Pinoy para sa Batang Pinoy Act would do so much to combat child hunger and malnutrition. I can personally attest to how powerful the school-based feeding model can be if implemented with vigor and compassion. In the 6 years since we started our pilot school feeding program in Valenzuela City, the nutrition and health of the 16,000 students, beneficiaries, have significantly improved. Our students are full, happy, and performing well in class. Imagine what we can achieve if we implement the same kind of program across the entire country. This is precisely why I filed Senate Bill number 204, the Nutri-Eskwela Act of 2016, one of the bills consolidated into the measure approved by the body today. I sincerely hope that this worthy legislation will be signed into law by the President before the end of the 17th Congress. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Poe is recognized. Majority Leader, Senator Poe.
Mr. President, I thank the sponsor and this chamber for passing the feeding program bill. It is a train coping bill. It is definitely one of the safety nets for the poor at a time when pieces of basic goods and food are increasing. It is a measure to save the pain by the burdensome demands that we have now. The math will prove our contention. Train assistance to 10 million farmers is 200 pesos a month, 2,400 annually. Tapos may sunset provision pa until 2020. Compare this with DepEd's school-based feeding and DSWD's meal program in communities, 18 pesos per meal, which when multiplied by 200 days is 3,600 a year. Higit pa, walang leakage kung diretso sa sikmura ng ating mga anak. Ito po ang ating investment for the future. Ako'y nagpapasalamat kasi ngayon, kung ito'y mapapasa na, lalong-lalo na kasama yung lower house, ang ating mga anak sa public school ay meron ng makukunan ng pagkain. Maraming salamat po.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move for the consideration for third reading of Senate Bill 1270 under Committee Report 212.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, approved.
May we request the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
Secretary, please.
An act declaring the last Monday of January every year as a special working holiday in observance of National Bible Day.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed last February 1st, thereby complying with the three-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading, Senate Bill 1270, through a roll call vote.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, approved. Secretary.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 18 affirmative votes, 0 negative votes, Senate Bill number 1270 is approved on third reading.
May I
Mr. President,
Senator Villanueva.
just like to put on record that we commend the action by this chamber, and like to take this opportunity to thank our colleagues. The Bible says in 1 Samuel chapter 2 verse 30 letter B, those who honor the Lord will be honored, but those who despise him, they shall be disdained. So I believe that as we honor the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, we are inviting blessings for this country and for this august chamber. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move for the consideration for third reading of Senate Bill 192 under Committee Report 222.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
May we request the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act mandating the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration to develop, publish, disseminate, and update a handbook of the rights and responsibilities of migrant workers, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 8042, otherwise known as the Migrant Workers and Overseas Filipinos Act of 1995 as amended by Republic Act number 10022.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed last February 1st, 2018, thereby complying with the three-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading, Senate Bill 192, through a roll call vote.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. The Secretary will now conduct the roll call vote.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 18 affirmative votes, 0 negative votes, Senate Bill number 192 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move for the consideration for third reading of Senate Bill 1531 under Committee Report 141.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
May we request the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act institutionalizing energy efficiency and conservation, enhancing the efficient use of energy, granting incentives to energy efficiency and conservation projects, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed February 1st, 2018, thereby complying with the three-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading, Senate Bill 1531, through a roll call vote.
Any objection? Hearing none, we proceed to the roll call vote.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, Drilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligarda, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 18 affirmative votes, 0 negative votes, Senate Bill number 1531 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, I move for the consideration on third reading of Senate Bill 1623 under Committee Report 190.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
May we request the Secretary to read the title of the measure?
An act reducing the cap of recoverable system loss rate and for other purposes.
Mr. President, printed copies of the measure were distributed February 1st, 2018, thereby complying with the 3-day rule. I therefore move to vote on third and final reading Senate Bill 1623 through a roll call vote.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, De Lima, De Rilon, Ejercito, Escudero, Gatchalian, Gordon, Honasan, Ontiveros, Lacson, Ligada, Pacquiao, Pangilinan Po, Recto, Soto, Trillanes, Villanueva, Villar, Soberi, Senate President Pimentel.
With 16 affirmative votes, 0 negative votes, Senate Bill number 1623 is approved on third reading.
Mr. President, before we call the measure of Senator Lacson to begin with the interpolation of the two hazing committee reports, may I move to correct the referral made on House Bill 6573 pertaining to the topic prohibiting and regulating hazing, which was transmitted to the Senate for its concurrence from the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, Justice and Human Rights, and Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Codes and Laws to the Committee on Rules, Mr. President. We are referring to the to the Committee on Rules, considering that its counterpart measures in the Senate have already been reported out by the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, and therefore, later on, Senator Lacson can move for the inclusion of this House bill. So I move that they be referred to the
Change of referral.
rules, change of referral.
So is there any objection to the motion which involves a change in referral? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
So now, Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, I move to resume consideration of the following. Senate Bill 1662 under Committee Report 233 and PS Resolution 504-510 and the privileged speech of Senator Mig Subiri under the Committee Reports number 232. These measures pertain to the strengthening the law of hazing and the inquiry on the death of Horacio Atio Castillo due to hazing, respectively, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, those measures are now under consideration.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we're in the period of interpolation. So I move to recognize the chairman of the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, Senator Pampilo Lacson, and to interpolate the majority leader, Mr. President, and thereafter one or two more members.
The sponsor, Senator Lacson, is recognized and to interpolate the majority leader.
May I have a 1-minute suspension? Mr.
Session
President, before we
suspended.
proceed? Thank you, Mr. President. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Will the distinguished former general, five-star general, Mr. President, and Chief of the Philippine National Police favor us with some answers to some questions, Mr. President, to elaborate more on the bills that we are taking up?
Certainly and willingly, to the distinguished Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is not unknown to us that the conviction rate of hazing cases is very low. In fact, as you have stated in your sponsorship speech, since the enactment of the anti-hazing law in 1995, only one conviction was ever recorded. In this proposed measure, what safeguards were added in order to make sure that the conviction rate will increase?
As a matter of fact, we adopted some of the recommendations in the Dungo and Sibal case, Mr. President. And we incorporated those recommendations from the ponente himself, Justice Jose Catral Mendoza, as part of the committee report or the amendments to the Republic Act 8049, Mr. President.
Can you educate some of us on what is this Dungo case, Mr. President?
Well, this happened in Laguna, Mr. President. The victim was a certain Villanueva, who was a neophyte and subsequently was killed during an initiation rites in Los Baños, Calamba. In Los Baños, Laguna, rather, Mr. President. And Dungo and Sibal were convicted by RTC Laguna, upheld by the Court of Appeals, and eventually, since the decision rendered for a capital offense was reclusion perpetua, it reached the Supreme Court. And this is the only case where the Supreme Court affirmed the decision of the lower courts, Mr. President.
So we now have in your committee report the adoption of these proposals that will strengthen, Mr. President.
That is correct, Mr. President. And of course, the output provided by the members of the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs, jointly with the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your proposed measure expands the definition of hazing. Can you give us an example of initiation rights that does not constitute hazing?
The only exceptions under the proposed measure are those performed by the military establishment or the police institution as approved by the Secretary of National Defense and the National Police Commission, meaning if the recruits or the trainees are subjected to physical exercises, they can be exempted from being accused or charged with violation of anti-hazing law, as proposed in this measure, Mr. President. Whereas in other fraternities and sororities and other organizations, they may be charged with hazing if they force their neophytes or recruits or trainees in exerting too much physical exercise, Mr. President. Not related.
In the definition of physical exercise. But beyond that, of course, that will constitute hazing already.
Definitely, Mr. President. If a cadet, for example, a plebe, is subjected to physical torture or physical harm, the upperclassman or the trainer can still be charged with hazing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Now, in the previous Congress, I think you were here already, January 2013, then PNP Chief Alan Purisima, because during that time I already filed a bill upgrading the punishment or the penalties in hazing. Former PNP Chief Alan Purisima said in an interview with a famous newspaper, quote, "It's different at the PNPA where cadets practice financial whacking, a form of punishment where an erring junior cadet is ordered by his upperclassmen to produce money from nothing." Now, Purisima added that, quote, "This form of hazing or punishment among PNPA cadet teaches a future officer of the PNP to steal or borrow money from fellow cadets in order to comply with orders from his superiors." In our bill now, is in the definition of hazing, will this include this kind of abuses, Mr. President?
Definitely, Mr. President. That would fall under psychological suffering or yeah. I'll read for the record the definition of terms under Section 1, Mr. President, if I may be allowed.
Yes.
For purposes of this act, this is the proposed amendment. Hazing refers to any physical or psychological suffering, harm, or injury inflicted on a recruit, member, neophyte, or applicant as a form of an initiation rite or practice made as a prerequisite for admission or a requirement for continuing membership in a fraternity, sorority, organization, including but not limited to paddling, whipping, beating, branding, force, and so forth and so on. And this will also include any activity intentionally made or otherwise by one person alone or acting with others that tends to humiliate or embarrass, degrade, abuse, or endanger by requiring a recruit, member, neophyte, or applicant to do menial, silly, or foolish tasks, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. All right. Well, I was about to ask a clarification on that under the definition of terms. The oh, by the way, before that, the former chief was referring to the PNPA, you know.
PNPA,
yeah,
yes, Mr. President.
The distinguished gentleman is a graduate from PMA. Mabuti na lang, hindi siya PMA. No, he PMA. And also his classmate, his mista, Senator Greg Unasan, Mr. President. Did Senator Unasan suffer hazing in PMA, Mr. President?
Both of us did, Mr. President. Daily.
In your first year?
In our first year,
All
Mr.
right.
President. Only plebes are subjected to initiation rights, Mr. President.
I have a question on your definition of terms, if you don't mind, Your Honor, Mr. President. under your definition of terms, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, Philippine National Police, PNP, the Philippine National Police Academy, PNPA, and other similar uniformed service learning institutions are covered organizations under this act. However, as stated under the provision on prohibition on hazing, to wit, the physical, mental, and psychological testing and training procedures and practices to determine and enhance the physical, mental, and psychological fitness of prospective regular members of the AFP and the PNP as approved by the Secretary of National Defense and the National Police Commission shall not be considered as hazing for purposes of this act. Now, the question, Mr. President, is if the said testing and training procedures and practices of the PNPA, the PMA, and other similar uniform service learning institutions shall not be considered as hazing, could there be an instance that these institutions will be held liable under this act? Or is this provision absolute, Mr. President?
No, Mr. President, there are certain acts that can still be punishable under this bill, under this measure, if they are not related to the training being undertaken by the recruit or the trainee, Mr. President. And of course, the persons involved, the officers and the trainers involved, can also be held liable.
All right. The reason I ask, Mr. President, is I want to make sure that we are not misinterpreted in some of our provisions here. No? So, if there is a possibility that these uniformed service learning institutions can be held liable for this act, where do we draw the line between a legitimate testing and training procedure from the overbearing actions of those authorized personnel who trains our future uniformed personnel?
If the act is a prerequisite for admission into the uniformed service or services, then they may not be held, the persons involved may not be held liable under this measure, Mr. President.
Senator Gordon was asking, like the SEAL training.
Yeah, the SEAL training. They're submerged underwater for several minutes, and that's part of the training. So the trainer, the officer concerned, who's supervising the training, may not be held liable because that's part of their of the prerequisites for admission to be a full-time SEAL member or SWAG member, Mr. President.
Okay. Well, just in case, Mr. President, are there any remedy available for student trainees who feel that their rights are violated by reason of physical, mental, and psychological testing and training procedures and some practices of
the remedy is they can go to court and file a complaint against those responsible for inflicting physical harm or psychological harm to their persons, Mr. President.
So the bill does not give an absolute rule, you know, to these uniformed institutions.
They will fall under the category of organization because we expanded. This is not only limited to schools, to fraternities, sororities, but this bill, if adopted or if approved, will also cover organizations. Even business organization, Mr. President, will be subjected to liability under this proposed measure.
Subject to the definition of hazing.
Subject to the definition of hazing.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. Now, just two more points. PNPA is under the Philippine Public Safety College, the PPSC, while the PMA is directly supervised by the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Now, will there be any difference as to the supervision or permission required by this bill in conducting initiation rites?
Well, in regard to the Philippine National Police Academy, which is under the Public Safety College, a NAPOLCOM, there should be an authority from the NAPOLCOM. They will issue out guidelines on the training of these prospective police officers. regarding the Philippine Military Academy, they're under the supervision of the Secretary of National Defense. So it is the SND that will issue the guidelines, Mr. President, on which kind of training, up to what extent they will be subjected to physical exercises or related activities, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Now, regards just one final point, regarding the quote, regulation of initiation rights for community-based fraternities, sororities, or organizations. May we know where they are required to file their written application to conduct their initiation? Ano ba ito?
Community-based, they will have to file their application with the barangay, chairman. Or even the mayor, Mr. President.
Barangay, municipal, city mayor.
And likewise, the barangay chairman, the barangay official concerned, will have to assign a monitoring team or a monitoring representative who shall witness the initiation rights. So see to it that hazing will not occur, and they are mandated under this law to render a report to the mayor, barangay chairman, or school authorities, whatever is the case, Mr. President.
Pero they should be in the place where
They
they are
should be
registered.
present.
Huh?
They should be physically present to witness.
Okay. So dapat doon sa saan yung lugar na registered sila?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. So a community-based fraternity registered in a barangay wherein it is primarily based cannot file a written application to conduct its initiation either in another barangay?
No, they cannot, Mr. President.
Cannot. It must be in the
It
area.
will fall under Section 8, registration of community-based and other similar fraternities, sororities, or organizations. And upon
All right.
registration, all community-based fraternities, sororities, or organizations shall submit a comprehensive list of members and officers which shall be updated yearly from the date of registration, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Gordon,
I plead to Senator Gordon.
yes, I will answer this question outside of the plenary, Mr. President. Thank you. We wish to thank the gentleman for the hard work that he has put into this. We finally want to see the light of day on a stronger anti-hazing law. I have filed this 3 times. It has never reached this stage. So finally, I hope we will be able to do so now. There is no other any other member who Senator Gordon wishes to be recognized, Mr. President. Still in the period of interpellation.
Senator Gordon is recognized for purposes of interpellation.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and majority floor. Will the gentleman yield, my good friend from
Definitely, willingly to the chairman of the Justice and Human Rights Committee, which held hearings jointly with the Dangerous Drugs, Public Order and Dangerous Drugs Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to cite a particular situation, Mr. President, involving one of the people that we encountered during the hearing on the immigration as well as the Jack Lab controversy. Gentleman's name is Mr. Argusino. And he was a member of the fraternity. And he was convicted of homicide through reckless imprudence and sentenced to 2 years, 4 months, and 1 day to 4 years imprisonment. After which he applied for probation, Mr. President. Now, beyond that, Mr. President, Mr. Argusino passed the bar exams held in 1993. And the court deferred his oath taking due to his previous conviction for reckless imprudence in homicide. Does our new law take into consideration this situation where somebody who has been convicted of being involved in hazing will now be allowed to become a lawyer and take his oath?
Well, he can take up law, but I think we should also consider if he can take his oath as a member of the bar, Mr. President.
That's precisely my
That
question.
may be included as a
If the two gentlemen will allow, Senator Drilon wants
Yes,
to
Mr.
join the...
President.
It's okay. Senator Drilon, please.
Just as an input, Mr. President, we must not forget the fact that admission to the practice of law is an exclusive power of the Supreme Court. So I do not know whether we can include provisions which will encroach upon this authority of the Supreme Court, just as an input in this discussion. Thank you, Mr. President.
May I ask a question of my good friend, Senator Dillon? Is the gentleman implying that we cannot, in a way, amend? Would it be an intrusion on the independence of the judiciary, especially
no,
when...
by specific provision of the Constitution, and the Senate President can confirm this, admission to the practice of law is a matter within the exclusive prerogative of the Supreme Court. I mean, that's how we interpret it. It's a matter for us to do, but I'm just pointing out that there is this particular provision in the Constitution.
And my question, Your Honor, is whether the Congress can say that admission may be controlled so far as the practice of law, but it can be subject to certain restrictions.
Well, my view is that we cannot, and especially that the Supreme Court will be interpreting its own power. So you can imagine what kind of jealous attitude they'll have to protect this power to the admission of the practice of law. Anyway, that's for the gentleman proponent to consider. I'm just putting that on the record.
Thank you very much, and I thank the gentleman for his enlightened questions. The only reason, Your Honor, that I raise this is because the Supreme Court indeed, in accordance with this case, has the power to regulate the admission of lawyers to the bar. And in this situation, that's why I raised it, Mr. President, was that the Supreme Court practically made an exception. In other words, they asked Mr. Argusino, who applied for admission to the practice of the bar after passing the bar, for to be allowed to take his oath, subject to the condition that the petitioner submit no less than 15 certifications, letters executed by others, 2 senators, 5 trial court judges, and 6 members of religious orders, and subject to the condition that petitioners shall likewise submit evidence that a scholarship foundation had been established in honor of Raul Camaligan, the hazing victim, through joint efforts with the latter's family and the 8 accused in the criminal case. My question is, the Supreme Court went out of its way and required these conditions upon Mr. Argusino for the practice of law. Does the proposed legislation that we're taking up consider the situation, and do we allow such situations to be covered by such situations?
There's a proposed amendment on Section 13, Mr. President. That's paragraph E. And in consultation with my legislative staff, I noticed that there's a provision here, proposed provision that should, and it says, provided that should the former officer, non-resident member, or alumnus be a member of the Philippine Bar, he or she shall immediately be subjected to disciplinary proceedings by the Supreme Court. We added the phrase, pursuant to its power to discipline members of the Philippine Bar. And I think that would remedy the concern or address the concern of Senator Drilon, the minority leader, for the legislature not to encroach into the domain of the Supreme Court, Mr. President.
May I have that provision again, Your Honor? I may have missed it in my perusal of the document.
It is not yet in the proposed measure, and I will request a member, probably the majority leader, to introduce this amendment, because we cannot incorporate this in our committee amendment since this is a substitute bill, Mr. President. And in fact, my staff has already coordinated with the staff of the Majority Leader to introduce this amendment or include this caveat, the phrase after or alumnus be a member of the Philippine Bar, he or she shall immediately be subjected to disciplinary proceedings by the Supreme Court. It was supposed to have ended there, but we want or we encourage a colleague to introduce the amendment to include the phrase pursuant to its power to discipline members of the Philippine Bar. And I see the Minority Leader nodding his head in agreement. So, Mr. President, I cannot see any problem anymore.
Yes, Your Honor. I just wanted to make sure that that is clarified in the debate so that in case there is a question in the Supreme Court, they can look at the debates as to that we handle this particular situation.
It may be constitutionally infirm, Mr. President. That's why we thought
Precisely.
of adding that phrase.
Besides, of course, the Minority Floor Leader was correct when he mentioned the fact that it is in the Constitution, but again, this provision may be held in question because it will be an intrusion on the powers of the Supreme Court. And that is why, Mr. President, my next question will now have to be on the matter of civil service. Are we going beyond the ambit of the penalties, Mr. President, and now saying that maybe he can go back to the Supreme Court and ask for a consideration of his case, which means that he is not totally condemned for life, that taking up the law and taking up the bar would be a manifestation of his desire to get back into society in a very, very honorable way, and that he would change his ways, of course. But at the same time, I don't think it is meant to be a perpetual disqualification, for an example, for a man who has been convicted to be able to get special dispensation, or for that matter, be allowed to practice, for example, or take the exams of the civil service so he can get back into the government. Or are we saying that he will be perpetually disqualified from having any service in the government, or even for that matter, perhaps, if we so desire, include him from being prohibited from holding public office?
I think the penalties, the application of penalties is prospective, Mr. President. But regarding other professionals, say engineers, doctors, dentists, they are covered by the PRC, you know. And we can mandate, actually, the Professional Regulatory Commission to take action, disciplinary action, against members or professionals who are indicted for the crime of hazing, Mr. President.
Well, let me just outline some situations. For
And that
example,
could be a separate investigation, just like the Ombudsman, while they conduct the criminal proceedings or the preliminary investigation in a criminal proceedings, they can also simultaneously conduct administrative investigation. In fact, I remember just recently, members of the Philippine National Police, the members of the Visa and Awards Committee and the acceptance team, they were meted the disciplinary action of dismissal from the PNP by the Supreme Court, even without the Sandigan Bayan resolving the main case or the criminal case, and this is involving the purchase of 2 second-hand helicopters, Mr. President.
because the provision here on line 13 of Article paragraph E of
Asan yan? Ibang page ko.
bear with me, Your Honor, if you may article?
Number, ay, saan ba yun, sir? Judicial Immediately Subject.
Anong article?
On page.
Kunin mo yung article. 1 minute suspension, Your Honor.
Session suspended.
Section 14.
Section 4 bill kasi tapos here by amendment. So naging section 4 dati naging section 13. So this is on ano kasi yung article na to eh. E sir, E. E sir, E.
Ready to resume, Your Honor.
Session susunod.
Yes, Mr. President, I just wanted to clarify the provision on the new article, on the new section 13, amending section 4, on page 11, Your Honor. And I'm looking at section E.
Yes, Mr.
At
President.
the last paragraph thereof, it says, further, should the former officer, non-resident member, or alumni belongs to any other profession subject to regulation by the Professional Regulatory Commission, he or she shall immediately be subjected to disciplinary proceeding by the respective professional boards, Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. President.
So, Your Honor, does this mean that there is now implied an accessory penalty?
That is correct, Mr. President.
I think we can clarify that further, that we can impose the accessory penalty to be imposed by the Professional Regulatory Commission or the respective...
The respective boards, Mr.
That's
President.
right, Your Honor. So, thank you, Mr. President. Meaning to say, for an example, in the case of, let's say, a faculty member, such as this particular case, who's, by the way, the Dean of the College of Law of UST, his presence there will mean that he is covered by this law, obviously, and that he could also be held to account by no less than the Supreme Court or by the integrated bar.
That is correct, Mr. President.
I just wanted to clarify that, Your Honor.
In fact, we included that in our recommendation on Committee Report 232. 232. The Committee Report on the Castillo Hazing case.
Yes.
Where we recommended that the Supreme Court look into the matter and impose disciplinary. But that's just a recommendation, Mr. President. That's in our Committee Report 232, covering the legislative inquiry in aid of legislation. And I was told that the Supreme Court has responded. They are taking it up in their next en banc meeting. In fact, they asked our office to submit the full report to the Supreme Court, which we did already. So I think in due time they will take the corresponding action against those members of the bar who we concluded tried to conceal or cover up the death of Acho Morales.
That's practically moral turpitude, that you conceal the crime, the dastardly crime committed. And Your Honor, I'm sure this will now, and you'll agree with me that now, in the case of that medtech who was awakened and he was brought there.
Solano.
Yes, and he brought the patient to Chinese Medical Center or Chinese General Hospital instead of bringing him to the UST, which is quite close to it. Again, that indicates the kind of mental degradation, or for that matter, mental condition that is trying to escape responsibility and trying to escape his duties to save life, which means that now the medtech, the Professional Regulatory Commission can now cancel his medtech license or even suspend him at the very least.
That is correct. Since he's a licensed medical technologist, Mr. President, but this cannot apply to him because it has no prospective application, Mr. President.
Well, I'm talking about the prospectivity of the situation that will occur.
A similar
in the
situation.
future.
Yes, Mr. President.
In any case, it will be applied to him also in the sense that he is part guilty of the old hazing law because he was a principal by direct cooperation, actually. Because without him, he could not have brought him to, he might have survived.
That is correct, Mr.
Because
President.
he brought him to the hospital that is far away, Your Honor. So it's really got to do with his professional status. I just asked this question, Your Honor, to clarify the width and breadth and depth of this law, which I'd like to congratulate the gentleman from Cavite for coming out with novel legislation that will hopefully change the condition in the colleges and the universities where a lot of hazing has been taking place. And of course, I just want to make a final clarification. This does not apply for soldiers who are under training, such as SEALs, or for that matter, who may be trained to resist interrogation, and in the process they will be put to a test as part of their training.
As long as they are within the guidelines issued by the Secretary of National Defense in the case of the Armed Forces of the Philippines members and the National Police Commission pertaining to the members of the PNP, BJMP, and Bureau of Fire, Mr. President.
Or other intelligence agencies,
Yes, Mr. President.
because there are civilian intelligence agencies. Is that correct, Your Honor?
That is correct, Mr. President.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gordon. Mr. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move to close the period of committee amendment, interpolations on Committee Report 232 and Committee Report 233.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion is carried.
Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments for Committee Report 232.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion of the Majority Leader is carried.
There are no amendments, Mr. President. I
There are
move
no
to close the
amendments.
period of amendments on Committee Report 232.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
I move to open the period of amendments for Committee Report 233.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Individual.
Mr. President, will the distinguished gentleman yield to 2 or 3 amendments, Mr. President? One amendment.
Yes, Mr. President.
The sponsor is recognized.
To avoid the impression that we are imposing an obligation to the Supreme Court, a co-equal branch, it is best to expressly acknowledge its power to discipline its members and subject the disciplinary proceedings of members of the Philippine Bar in accordance with the court's rules of procedure. So, on page 16, line 5, delete the word alumni and replace it with alumnus for consistency, Mr. President.
What does the
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Also on page 16, line 8, insert the phrase, pursuant to its power to discipline members of the Philippine Bar. This should be inserted before the phrase, provided further that should the former officer, etc., Mr. President.
What does the
Accepted,
sponsor?
Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Just for clarity, Mr. President, paragraph E shall now be read as E. Former officers, non-resident members, or alumni of the fraternity, sorority, or organization who, after the commission of any of the prohibited acts proscribed herein, will perform any act to hide, conceal, or otherwise hamper or obstruct any and all investigation that will be conducted thereafter, shall be punished with reclusion temporal and a fine of 1 million pesos, provided that should the former officer, non-resident member, or alumnus be a member of the Philippine Bar, he or she shall immediately be subjected to disciplinary proceedings by the Supreme Court pursuant to its power to discipline members of the Philippine Bar, and so on and so forth, Mr. President. So just for, I just read that for clarity, Mr. President.
That is clear.
So I have no more amendments. If there are no other members who wish to amend, this is Senate Bill 1662 under Committee Report 233. I move to close the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? Chair? Yes. Senator Lacson?
May I have 1 minute suspension?
Session is suspended.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, may I move back to page 16, line 9.
Page 16.
Line 9, replace alumni with alumnus, Mr. President.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? Chair hears none. Motion's carried.
No other amendments. I move to close the period of amendments, Mr.
Is
President.
there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion's carried.
Mr. President, just to be sure, we will look this over and hopefully pass this on second reading tomorrow. So I move to suspend consideration of Committee Report 232 and Committee Report 233.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. The motion of the majority leader is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I just take this opportunity to,
Yes, Senator Lacson is
to
recognized.
acknowledge and thank the authors of the amendment, Senators Gatchalian, Hunasan, Soto, Ligarda, Subiri, Aquino, and this representation, Mr. President. And the presiding officer, Senator Villanueva. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lacson.
Move to suspend the session for a few minutes, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Sante, Dwayne Sante.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Chamber, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill 1636 under Committee Report 213.
Any objection? Hearing none, we resume consideration.
Mr. President, this is the measure on Lifetime Cell Phone Number Act. The parliamentary status of the measure is that we're in the period of interpolation. So may we recognize the sponsor, Chair of the Committee on Economic Affairs, Senator Win Gatchalian, and to interpolate, the Minority Leader, Senator Frank Drilon.
The sponsor, Senator Gatchalian, is recognized, and for interpolation, the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentleman yield to some questions so that this representation can understand what is a very technical bill that is being presented to us?
I'll be more than happy to clarify the concept, Mr. President.
Well, from the title alone, I'm inclined to support this bill.
Yeah.
Lifetime Cell Phone Number Act. In other words, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. President, but the way I understand this is that the customer now, the customer is given the prerogative to retain either the existing mobile number when moving from one provider to another, or change the subscription from postpaid to prepaid without impairment of the standards impairment of the quality, reliability, and convenience prescribed by the National Telecommunications Company.
Yes, Mr. President. Actually, Mr. President, this is a very convenient feature for our consumers. In such, the consumers will now have the opportunity to keep his number regardless of what network he subscribes in. For example, Mr. President, I'm a subscriber of Globe, and if ever I want to move to Smart, I can bring my same cell phone number to Smart. This will now enable me to bring my same telephone number to Smart, and I will no longer have to text each and every person that I know, every family member that I know. Especially for businesses, if you have a lot of customers, a lot of suppliers, you don't have to text them your new number in Smart. So the same number in Globe, you can bring it to the new network and use the same telephone number, Mr. President.
Yes, very convenient, and I congratulate the good sponsor for providing that in the bill. But may we know if the prefix will be retained, meaning the first three numbers, which indicates whether it's Globe or Smart? Will this be retained if you move from one subscriber to another?
Yes, Mr. President. In our hearings, the prefix will no longer matter in this particular case. There will be right now we are used to having prefixes for a particular network, but in this case, since you are now you can now move from one network to another, the prefix will no longer apply to this feature, Mr. President.
Will the prefix be removed, or in other words, you no longer have a prefix before the 7 numbers that you have on your cell phone?
No, Mr. President, the prefix will still be the same. However, there's no particular network that will be attached to that specific prefix, Mr. President.
I see. So that what is Globe? Is it 091?
0917, the original.
0917.
Yes, Mr.
So
President.
if I am a holder of a I'm a subscriber to Globe and my prefix is 0917, when I move to Smart, it's still 0917.
Yes, Mr. President. Correct, Mr. President. And Mr. President,
And vice versa.
and vice versa, Mr. President. For example, you have Smart. Smart carries 0918, and if you decide to move to Globe, you will still carry the same prefix, 0918. And Mr. President, let me just have a few slides to elaborate this proposal, Mr. President. In slide number 2, Mr. President, there are already 110 countries in the whole world implementing this feature, Mr. President, 4 in the ASEAN region, Mr. President. And slide 3. As early as 1995, Mr. President, Singapore has already been implementing this feature. In fact, in Singapore, it's free of charge to their customers. And the list goes on, Mr. President. You have countries in Europe, countries in the Middle East, and slide number 5. And the ASEAN countries who are implementing this, Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, is free of charge. You know? And within 3 days of your intention of moving from one network to another, it should be implemented. Vietnam is the most recent country implementing this, Mr. President. That's why there's no processing time yet as of date. But based on our research, Vietnam is the most recent country who will implement this feature, Mr. President.
Okay, now, will it cost the consumer anything to move from one network to the other?
Mr. President, we specifically indicated in the bill that the consumer will not bear the cost of this feature, Mr. President.
Is there a time frame within which this kind of a service will be available to the consuming public?
Yes, Mr. President. Within 24 hours, this should be implemented. We made sure that the time frame is indicated in the bill because the telcos might make it difficult to the consumers from moving from one network to the other by having unspecified time frame. So we indicated within 24 hours, the portability or the porting should be activated already, Mr. President.
Now, if the bill is effective, say, or let's say theoretically, it became law on January 31, 2018, when is this beneficial service, when will this become available to all the consumers? You mean within X number of days? Or, in other words, what I'm asking is, is there a need for new equipment on the part of the supplier or the network in order to provide this kind of a service?
Mr. President, we indicated in the bill that within 90 days, the NTC will come up with the IRR. And after that 90 days, within 6 months, NTC will also set up the mechanism for this feature, Mr. President. So all in all, assuming that the bill will be approved on January 1st, in 9 months, we will see this feature activated, Mr. President.
Well, theoretically in 1 year, because you still have rules and regulations.
Yes. Yes.
So in other words, if theoretically we pass this on, say, March 1, or the bill becomes law on March 1 of 2018, by March 1 of 2019, this kind of a service will already be available to the consuming public. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President. And the reason why we indicated the 6 months time frame for the NTC to comply is because the telcos requested for ample time to buy the technology, to implement the technology, and also make sure that the interconnection is seamless between one network to the other. In our setting, Mr. President, because there are only 2 networks available, we don't see the 6 months being consumed, but the complication arises when there are more telcos that will come in and offer this feature, Mr. President.
Well, the complication right now, Mr. President, is that there is no NTC commissioner. I think all are suspended, so no one can draft the rules.
Yes, Mr. President. So hopefully by the time this bill
I
gets
think,
approved.
yes, the Senate President is trying to confirm whether, in fact, the NTC right now, commissioners are all suspended. To my knowledge, Mr. President, they are. So there are no one, assuming theoretically that we pass this today, no one will draft the rules and regulations. So now, I think what the question in all of the consumers' mind is, will this improve the service of the service providers?
Mr. President, this is a competition. This is a competition bill in which it will make the competition within telcos more vibrant by reducing the barriers of entry from one for the customers to move from one telco to the other telco, Mr. President. Right now, definitely one of the barriers to moving from one network to the other is that inconvenience of texting everyone in your cell phone your new number. But if this is removed, there will be no barriers for the consumers to move from one telco to the other, making it a purely service-oriented and purely price-oriented in terms of competition, Mr. President.
On the other hand, if one of the two services are superior than the other, then there will be a tendency to migrate to that one service provider, which will again require capital investment in cell sites, which they are very adamant to do, and the service will become worse.
Mr. President, this is actually quite timely because this morning I saw on TV that the third telco is supposed to be coming soon. And even though the third telco will slash prices by 50%, offer good signal from Luzon all the way to Mindanao, but most of us will not want to be hassled by texting everyone our new number and texting everyone our new cell phone number. This is actually one barrier to entry for consumers from switching from one telco to the other. So by removing that inconvenience, it will now become a purely price and service orientation for the telcos, Mr. President.
We have no doubt that this bill, if it becomes law, is beneficial to the consumer. But the question in our mind, Mr. President, is this sufficient to improve the quality of the service of our service providers today? Because really, it's terrible. I mean, that's a common conclusion. And this is traced principally to the inadequate number of cell sites that you have, especially in the NCR. And the inadequate number of cell sites could in turn be traced to the inability or refusal to invest in sufficient capital in order to improve the service by putting on more cell sites. As I said, this bill is very good. It can help. It is beneficial to the consumer. But may we know from the sponsor if he is aware of any plan to really improve the service by putting up more cell sites in densely populated areas such as Metro Manila?
Yes. Mr. President, that is actually a very valid concern. I remember during our hearings regarding the telco service, Vietnam has double the amount of cell sites compared to the Philippines. I think the Philippines has approximately 16,000 cell sites, and Vietnam has double the amount of cell sites.
And less the number of subscribers, I assume?
And lesser number of subscribers. The reason for that, Mr. President, is building a cell site is almost the same. Building a cell site encounters the same bureaucracy as building a house. No? Because you have to now go to the local government unit, you have to go to the building official, you have to submit your engineering plans. And after that, you have to get permits from the community. No? The community is also a big factor in getting the permits. No objection certificate from the community. One of the reasons why we don't have a lot of cell sites is because also of the bureaucracy involved in putting up a cell site, Mr. President. So I think later on we might be also looking at ways to streamline the building of cell site so that the new player, the incumbent and the new player will have a easier time of rolling out the number of cell sites here in our country, Mr. President.
Or more accurately, these companies will no longer have a reason for not providing the cell sites because we will try to remove all those bottlenecks in the bureaucracy. But having said that, isn't that the more urgent concern if the gentleman is saying that indeed it is difficult to put up a cell site apart from the capital investment because of the bureaucratic requirements? Can we not take a look at all these bureaucratic requirements and just remove all of those that are only making it difficult unnecessarily to put up the cell sites?
Yes. Mr. President, this bill actually enhances competition, and this representation will be filing a few other proposals to enhance competition in the telco industry. The problem that the good gentleman from Iloilo posed earlier is also a problem of administration. And this representation will also propose a few proposals to untangle the administrative portion of the telecommunications industry. That will include red tape, application for putting up of cell sites, Mr. President.
Like for example, to put up a cell site, what would the company, the telecommunication company, have to go through in terms of permit, and which permits by law can we just remove?
Okay. Mr. President,
just as an example,
yes.
Walk us through, yeah.
In securing permits and licenses, both from national government and local government, you will need 26 licenses and permits.
26?
26 licenses and permits. And the normal average
just
time...
Just for one cell site?
That's on one cell site, Mr. President. And to secure those 26 permits and licenses, it will take an average of 9 months
Jesus.
to secure for one cell site, Mr. President. And the cost per cell site is about 25 million pesos on the average, Mr. President. So just imagine, to put up one cell site, it will take you 9 months just to secure the permits and licenses. This is excluding the construction period of the cell site, Mr. President.
Okay, 26 permits, 9 months to secure. 26 permits. Can we have, for the record, what are these permits? Can you name a few of them?
Mr. President, definitely in any construction of facility, whether it's a house or a cell site, you will need the barangay clearance, number one.
No, because what I'm pointing out is, let us review this. For example, now you say barangay clearance. By law, we can say barangay clearance should no longer be required.
Yes. Definitely,
what else?
Definitely the no objection letter from the community. That's number one. Number two, the application to the building official. Yeah. And the building official comes in 3 forms. You have the mechanical, electrical, and the civil aspect of the asset. And then after that, you have to get an occupancy permit, even though you're not occupying anything here. But that's in the law, Mr. President. So that alone, that's a local government concern. This is excluding the national permits, because you also have to apply to NTC, and get their permission to build the cell sites, Mr. President.
Yes. May I suggest, Mr. President, as a matter, I think it will be in order, if we would request the Secretariat or the committee itself to review all of these permits and see what we can repeal without doing violence to the regulatory aspect of the permit issuance or the regulatory relevance of these agencies. Because I strongly feel, Mr. President, that we must remove all the reasons for these telco companies, telephone companies, to use as an excuse for not providing the service. Right now, I can appreciate if I were PLDT or Globe, I'll say, you know, I want to put up cell sites, but it takes me 9 months to put up one. I want, really, the ease of, you know, this does not make a very attractive, make our business environment attractive. So I would strongly suggest, if I may, that the good sponsor, the gentleman from from Valenzuela, who has been so diligent in presenting measures on energy and telecommunication companies, to devote time and energy to really help the public and see what we can eliminate from this numerous 26 permits and licenses that we have to secure before a single cell site can be put up. As the gentleman pointed out, Vietnam has already
double the amount we have.
Vietnam has doubled the amount.
So 32,000 cell sites versus 16,000 cell sites in the Philippines, Mr.
32,000 cell sites in Vietnam versus 16,000 for us. And I'm sure a large part of this is because of capital investment. But when we see the advertisements of these companies in the national media, you start to wonder, you know, where the priorities are.
Well, Mr. President, talking about profitability of the telcos, I have a slide for that, Mr. President. Because I was expecting you to talk about profitability. In slide 15, Mr. President, and this is actually a very interesting slide, Mr. President. Singapore actually is considered the most prosperous and the most advanced ASEAN country in the ASEAN country here in our region. But even Singapore, Singtel does not make the profit margin of what PLDT and Globe makes, Mr. President. So the EBITDA of PLDT and Globe, EBITDA is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. In 2016, the margins, the EBITDA margins of PLDT is 38%, Globe is 39%, Singtel is 29%. So just imagine Singtel, which is a very profitable company, does not even make the same amount of profit compared to PLDT and Globe, Mr. President.
And so does China, was that China Telecom?
China Mobile, Mr. President.
China
Correct.
Mobile.
Correct, Mr. President. Not even China Mobile, which is again considered a Class A mobile company, Mr. President.
So this validates the fear or the impression of many of us that indeed our good friends in the telecommunication companies often forget that a principal obligation is to provide public service. And it appears that the stockholders are given priority to the sacrifice of better service. And here it is indicated that Singtel, as the gentleman said, makes less return on their investment than PLDT and Globe.
Correct, Mr. President. And that's why, in terms of capital expenditures, I don't think that is a question. The telcos definitely have cash to roll out a massive infrastructure program. But definitely, I definitely agree with the good gentleman from Iloilo that we need to also untangle the reasons behind why these telcos are not putting up the number of cell sites or the required number of cell sites to improve service. Then we will definitely look into the red tape angle of putting up the cell sites, Mr. President.
I think that should be a priority that this Congress should have and can contribute to the welfare of our people. Well, with that, Mr. President, we would like to thank the good gentleman for spreading into the records the answers to the questions that we have, and I think the minority group fully endorses the passage of this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to thank the good minority floor leader for the insights and the suggestion and the other possibilities to improve the service of our mobile companies here in our country.
The minority leader has requested me to go back on the issue of when can we expect the committee to come up with a study as to which of these permits and licenses can be dispensed with by legislation. For example, just standing here, I really do not understand what input a barangay clearance would have on a cell site.
Unfortunately, Mr. President, this is one of the, in fact, this representation when I was a mayor tried to remove that that requirement, the barangay clearance, Mr. President. Unfortunately, it's built in the local government code. Yes. And that's one of the things that any local government have problems removing. But I think if we have an overarching bill to promote the massive construction of cell sites, we can actually look at this and maybe we can exempt building of cell sites from the barangay clearance.
Since the sponsor was able to name a number, you said 26, then you must have an idea what those steps are or permits. So maybe you can
Mr. President,
provide each senator and what are those 26?
Yes, Mr. President. Unfortunately, this is one of the few things that I don't have a slide on.
We can,
so
but
I have some research on that, Mr.
In
President.
writing, yes, in writing, separate communication.
Yes, Mr. President.
for example, a certificate of non-coverage or environmental clearance from the DNR is one of them. Zoning clearance.
Yes, Mr. President. That's a local government requirement.
Height clearance from the CAB. Height clearance, but I know, but if the cell site is in Quezon City, I cannot see why there is a need for a height clearance from the Civil Aeronautics Board. Building permit, mayor's permit. I think we can review all of this. And there is, we passed the expanded red tape act, if I recall correctly, authored by the gentleman. Is it on BICAM? Is it the BICAM?
Yes, Mr. President, we're in the process of the BICAM. However, there's no schedule yet. No.
Yes. Is it possible, just to fast track this, to include a provision in our version which will eliminate these unnecessary or duplications or things which are there simply because the law provided for it without thinking that it will apply to cell sites? So that, in other words, can the Senate contingent led by the good sponsor come up with a provision to be included in the BICAM to remove those unnecessary clearance requirements?
Yes, Mr. President. I am under the assumption that since the Anti-Red Tape Act is a all-encompassing bill, it should cover the application for cell sites, Mr. President. But I have to double check whether the application for cell sites is definitely included in the Anti-Red Tape bill, Mr. President.
Yes, I think it's given the urgency of the situation and the magnitude of the problem. I think we should assist the general public in coming in through measures that can ease their difficulties and encourage and remove any excuse from the telecom companies in not providing and rolling out enough cell sites. You know, Vietnam has 32,000. We have 16,000, and we have more subscribers than Vietnam.
That's why, Mr. President, I also want to emphasize that the incoming third telco, as promised to improve the services, might not deliver it in the near term to even medium term time frame, Mr. President, because there are a lot of constraints or barriers for the third telco to operate in and to be able to compete in our environment. I'm sure they can offer a better price. I'm sure they can offer a better service, but I'm not very sure if they can put up cell sites within 1 or 2 months time frame, because the average is about 9 months. That's why there are a lot of barriers beyond the telco competition aspect, Mr. President. There are red tape. There are also barriers to mobility of the customers. So these are the things that we are looking at and slowly untangling, Mr. President.
But those within the power of Congress to undo, I think we owe it to our people, you know, to look into this. Yes, maybe it will reduce the construction by 1 day, but never mind. At least we improve the environment to enable us, or to remove the excuse that red tape prevents us from making our business environment better.
I agree, Mr. President, and definitely this representation will be looking into this aspect. We have the data, but we need to just break it down into smaller pieces and propose to the body legislation that will reduce the number of days and reduce number of red tape, or eliminate red tape for this matter in putting up cell sites.
I sincerely believe that dependency of the Anti-Red Tape Act in BICAM gives us the opportunity to be able to act on this very quickly. We will not be responsible to remove those licenses which are essential for safety, but other requirements which are there simply because it is a general requirement, maybe can be looked at. It is obvious, barangay clearance. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. The barangay has no capacity to determine whether or not a particular cell site should be put up. Also, a radiation evaluation study is required when you put up a cell site. What's this, fencing? Mr. President, don't fall on your chair. There is also a fencing permit necessary.
Fencing, yes.
Fencing.
Yes, sir. That's correct. Fence.
Bakod.
Yes.
Oh.
But I think the most complicated, Mr. President, is the no objection from the community.
Never mind. We can. Yeah, that's another problem. We're just talking about
the government
factors which we can control. A sanitary permit.
Yeah.
Why should there be a sanitary permit for a cell site?
Sanitary permit.
An occupancy permit. As the gentleman said, you do not occupy a cell site, but you need an occupancy permit. So these things really make it difficult for a cell site to be rolled. Again, I hope that the gentleman will not mind our being makulit.
No, not at all, Mr. President. It's a good suggestion, and definitely it's part of our advocacy of improving the service and the price of cell phone services here in our country. And we owe it to our people, just like the gentleman from Iloilo said. And these proposals are meant to improve competition and improve services, Mr. President.
So more specifically, can I make one last suggestion or request? That the technical people review objectively the 26 permits and licenses required before a cell site can be constructed, and remove those that are just there for this because it is required by law and cannot be justified, and include this reform in the expanded Red Tape Act that is now Anti-Red Tape Act that is now in BICAM. May we request that from the...
Yes, Mr. President. I give my assurance to the good gentleman from Iloilo to look into the expanded Anti-Red Tape Act, whether it covers, but I'm pretty sure it covers, no? It covers the application for cell site, Mr. President.
Member.
Okay. There is an issue raised to me here, and I wish to request some answer from the good sponsor. For prepaid subscribers who are conscious of the cost, they usually avail of unlimited promos, which are conditioned on calling or texting people from the same network. How will the caller be put on notice that a number has already switched from one carrier to the other if the number remains, for example, how can the caller be put on notice that a number has already switched to Globe if the number starts with 0920, which is identified with Smart? The concern is that it might consume the load of a prepaid subscriber.
Mr. President, I have a simple diagram, no, in slide 13, Mr. President, and this is actually how the process will flow, Mr. President. The subscriber makes a porting request from the recipient provider, and the recipient provider will now inform the donor provider, which is the existing network. And then after clearing, this should happen all within 24 hours. After clearing, the donor provider will now inform the recipient provider, which is the new telco, and the new telco will now inform the subscriber, Mr. President. So this is actually quite a simple, straightforward process, Mr. President. So just to answer your question directly, Mr. President, in our bill we specified that until the subscriber is informed of this process, service will still continue. So whatever you are enjoying, whatever you are using with your old provider, you will still continue to enjoy it, Mr. President.
Interjection, Mr. President.
Yes, with the permission of the
With the
two
permission
gentlemen.
of the Minority Leader and Senator Gatchalian, the point raised by the Minority Leader is very valid because the next question then about the prepaid numbers is that the transfer or the lifetime cell phone number act, I suppose, in your bill would have procedures on postpaid cards, on postpaid phone numbers and cards. When it comes to prepaid cards, I think we will be having a lot of difficulty because you can buy it in a sari-sari store and you don't have to activate, and it's going to be messy. I think the question of the Minority Leader is very valid. Pagdating sa prepaid, medyo may problema ito. Even yung procedure na, I don't think they'll do that. They'll just throw away the card and buy another one. So do we have a provision in this bill that will specifically address the problem of prepaid cards?
Basically, Mr. President, during a hearing, when you're a prepaid subscriber, normally you just buy, for now, no? But I think the majority floor leader in this representation has the same proposal to register prepaid SIM cards. I think we filed that bill together. But in the current setup right now, if you're a prepaid subscriber, Mr. President, this process will only be triggered if you have an intention of moving from one telco to the other. So if you don't have any intention, you will still remain anonymous, no, in the eyes of the telecommunication companies. So for example, I'm a prepaid subscriber and I want to transfer to the other network, then this this type of procedure will now be implemented. You will have to register your name, and that
The number.
by registering your name, that number will now be attached to your name, and this process will now be activated, Mr. President. So this is where the prepaid subscribers will come in, Mr. President.
Mr. President, really, I don't see the I don't see the point, Mr. President. A prepaid subscriber, why would he want to change networks? All he has to do is buy the SIM card of the other network
But I think
and use that particular. You're talking only of a person who would want to retain his prepaid number.
yes, Mr. President. Mr. President,
And
it will
that is
be-
those are very few, as far as we're concerned.
It will be a question of economics in behalf of the prepaid holder, Mr. President. If it will be cheaper for him to buy a new prepaid, then he will buy a new prepaid. But if it will be cheaper for him to move to a new subscriber, then he can activate this feature, Mr. President. So I guess it will be the decision of the subscriber whether it will be beneficial for him to just buy a new prepaid SIM card or transfer to a new network. Bahala na siya doon, Mr. President. He has to compute the end benefit to his to himself, Mr. President.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and we have no more questions. So we look forward to the passage of this measure and the commitment of the gentlemen that they will include in the Anti-Red Tape Act now in BICAM a few provision which will eliminate the requirements of permits and licenses, which are really not essential and serve no purpose in putting up the cell sites, in the hope that this will encourage these service providers to roll out more cell sites and maybe take a good look at public service instead of the bottom line in their balance sheets. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one more question,
Yes,
if you
Mr.
don't
President.
mind. Nothing in the bill prevents a person from changing his number, no?
Yes.
Nothing, Mr. President.
I know for a fact that there are many instances where they change their network and also change their numbers. So good if that's the case. Now 26 permits definitely unnecessary. I think the reasonable request of the minority leader and the Senate President for a listing would give us so that we would be given time to look and look at the possibility of having it incorporated also, or perhaps in the period of amendment on this bill we may take up something to that effect. So knowing for a fact that the President has been always proposing less red tape everywhere, from national to local government, it's about time that we do look into such.
Yes, and I'm sorry to be on the floor again, but maybe we can request the Centro Gatsalian to provide us with the list, and we take it up formally in the Senate with the provision of the majority leader, and give these instructions to our Senate panel in the BICAM on the anti-red tape bill, so that he would have that authority to propose this.
Yes, Mr. President, I will definitely itemize the list of permits and licenses that are required to put up a cell site, as well as I'll try to get a flow chart of this permits and licenses and furnish every member of the Senate. Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you. With that, Mr. President, to give time to the members to study the proposed measure when we go to the period of amendments, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill 1636 under Committee Report 213.
So we just suspend Majority Leader. Okay, so any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, may I move that the prepared explanation of the President Pro Temp, Senator Recto, on Senate Bill 1279 also be included into the records of the Senate, inserted into the records, Mr. President.
Let it be so inserted.
May we proceed with the reference of business, Mr. President?
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
Messages from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 29 January 2018, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. 6923, an act strengthening the Philippine Crop Insurance Corporation, repealing for the purpose of Presidential Decree number 1467, entitled Creating the Philippine Crop Insurance Corporation, prescribing its powers and activities, providing for its capitalization and for the required government premium subsidy, and for other purposes as amended by Presidential Decree number 1733 and Republic Act number 8175.
Referred to the Committees on Government Corporations and Public Enterprises, Agriculture and Food, Ways and Means, and Finance.
6686, an act granting full insurance coverage to all qualified agrarian reform beneficiaries of the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, amending for the purpose Section 14 of the Republic Act number 9700, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program extension with reforms.
To the Committees on Agrarian Reform and Finance.
6743, an act encouraging volunteerism during emergencies by protecting volunteers from liability.
To the Committees on Social Justice, Welfare and Rural Development, and Justice and Human Rights.
6779, an act recognizing the civil effects of church annulment decree.
To the Committee on Women, Children, Family Relations, and Gender Equality.
6893, an act regulating the use of treatment technology for municipal and hazardous wastes, repealing for the purpose Section 20 of Republic Act number 8749, entitled the Philippine Clean Air Act of 1999.
To the Committees on Environment and Natural Resources and Ways and Means.
6908, an act strengthening the security of tenure of workers, amending for the purpose Presidential Decree number 442 as amended, otherwise known as the Labor Code of the Philippines.
The Committee on Labor, Employment, and Human Resources Development.
6922, an act declaring August 30 of every year as National Press Freedom Day.
To the Committee on Public Information and Mass Media.
6619, an act increasing the bed capacity of the Baguio General Hospital and Medical Center from 500 to 800 beds and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Health and Demography and Finance.
6971, an act establishing a national high school in Barangay 184, Zone 19, Maricaban, Pasay City, to be known as President Corazon Cory C. Aquino National High School and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committees on Education, Arts and Culture, and Finance.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 30 January 2018, it designated Representatives Omentado, Yu, Salceda, Velarde Jr., Sambar, Nito, Belaro Jr., and Arcelias as conferees to the Bicameral Conference Committee on the Disagreeing Provisions of House Bill number 5792, entitled An Act Institutionalizing the Balik Scientist Program and appropriating funds therefore, and Senate Bill number 1533, entitled An Act Institutionalizing the Balik Scientist Program, appropriating funds therefore, and for other purposes.
To the Committee on Rules.
Bills on first reading. 1673, an act providing for universal health coverage for Filipinos and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Angara.
To the Committees on Health and Demography, Ways and Means, and Finance.
1674, an act improving access of persons with disability to public and private facilities, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 7277, otherwise known as the Magna Carta for Disabled Persons, Senator Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay.
To the Committee on Social Justice, Welfare, and Rural Development.
1675, an act instituting government debt management reforms through the establishment of a comprehensive government debt management system, including through the constitution of a Congressional Oversight Committee on Debt Management to look into all foreign and domestic borrowings negotiated, contracted, or guaranteed by the President on behalf of the Republic of the Philippines, as well as those by the government or government-owned and controlled corporations, and for other purposes. Senator Laila M. De Lima.
To the Committees on Economic Affairs and Finance.
1676, an act amending Section 73 of Republic Act Number 7160, also known as the Local Government Code of 1991. Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Local Government and Electoral Reforms and People's Participation.
1677, an act providing for the rules on plea bargaining agreement in criminal cases, providing penalties in violation therefore, and for other purposes. Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
1678, an act establishing the autonomous region of the Cordillera. Senator Suberi.
To the Committees on Local Government, Electoral Reforms and People's Participation, Ways and Means and Finance.
Resolutions. Resolution number 599, resolution calling on the Senate to immediately constitute and convene the Congressional Oversight Committee on Republic Act number 9775, otherwise known as the Anti-Child Pornography Act of 2009. Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committee on Rules.
Peace Resolution number 600, entitled Resolution Directing the Appropriate Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the measures being taken by the Philippine National Police to preserve evidence and to ensure their proper handling and safekeeping at all stages of the investigation up to finality of any resulting court proceedings, including their ultimate disposition, with the end in view of maintaining the integrity and stringency of police investigation. Senator Laila De Lima.
To the Committees on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs and Justice and Human Rights.
Peace Resolution number 601, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the current policies, protocols, and funding mechanisms to ensure the quickest and most efficient government response to the urgent relief needs of residents of Albay affected by the ongoing eruption of the Mayon volcano. Senator Paulo Benigno Bamakino IV.
To the Committee on National Defense and Security.
Committee report. Committee report number 234, submitted by the Committee on Agriculture and Food on Peace Resolution number 560, introduced by Senator Cynthia Villar, entitled Resolution Directing the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Food to conduct an immediate inquiry in aid of legislation into the status of the programs of the Philippine Coconut Authority, consistent with the pursuit of the sustainable development of the coconut industry by finalizing the Coconut Farmers Registry and Industry Roadmap, with the intention of promoting the coconut industry and increasing the income of the coconut farmers to bring them out of poverty, recommending the adoption of this report and the implementation of its recommendations. Senator Villar.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Additional reference of business. Resolution. Peace Resolution number 602, entitled Resolution Directing the Senate Committee on Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the possible violation of Republic Act number 9160 as amended, otherwise known as the Anti-Money Laundering Act, by no less than President Rodrigo Roa Duterte and Mayor Sara Duterte Carpio, based on the bank documents showing undisclosed covered transactions as defined by the AMLA, with the end in view of recommending legislative measures to promote efficient compliance with the AMLA and further improving the said law. Senator Trillanes IV.
To the Committees on Accountability of Public Officers and Investigations, and Banks, Financial Institutions, and Currencies. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, as per request of Senator Honasan, the chair of the Special Committee on Marawi City Rehabilitation, and pursuant to Resolution Number 57, may I manifest that a subcommittee on housing has been created under the special committee and has designated Senator J.B. Ercito to chair the subcommittee for the information of the body, Mr. President.
Let the records reflect the creation of the subcommittee as well as this designation of Senator Ercito as the chairman of the subcommittee.
Mr. President, I move to adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, February 6, 2018.
Is there any objection? There being none, session is adjourned at 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, February 6, 2018.